Thank you, Chairwoman Roby. I'd also like to acknowledge the passing of Chairman Skelton. I did have the good fortune to serve under him for a number of years, and I found him to be a remarkably decent and honorable man, always of great integrity. He served our country, his district, and this committee, I think, with great distinction. And we're grateful for his service to our country, but we're sorry passed away. I'd also like to thank you, Chairwoman Roby, for working to arrange this hearing today. I believe, as do you, that this is a vital opportunity to build on the important and bipartisan discussions on those issues which our subcommittee had a chance to visit in an April hearing on Afghan women in the ANSF and in our July closed briefing with Mr. Sopko. As you noted, our Mother's Day codels to Afghanistan, as a result of them, we have witnessed firsthand the significant gains that Afghan women have made over the past decade in areas such as health, governance, and education. Both of us saw what was at stake as our forces continued to draw down, and so I would also like to thank all of our witnesses for being here today, each with your own valuable perspective. I'd also particularly like to thank you, Mr. Sopko, for the long-term commitment you have made to prioritize oversight over Afghan women's issues. Your office faces an enormous array of challenges in Afghanistan and is responsible, as we know, for monitoring every aspect of our reconstruction efforts under logistically frustrating circumstances. I was very encouraged by your recently announced comprehensive audit of our programs for Afghan women and girls due out early next year. And from the written testimonies of all our guests today, it's apparent that each of you is fundamentally in agreement that while there have been precious gains made for Afghan women and girls over the past decade, these gains are already threatened and will face significant challenges after the bulk of our armed forces have withdrawn at the end of 2014. Your testimony, Mr. Sopko, also notes the significant obstacles SIGAR and other Federal agencies will face in performing oversight on the ground due to security challenges. As much as 80% of the country may simply be inaccessible. After 2014, not only may the gains which have been made for women be eroded in these areas, it is also likely that we may not even know the full extent of the setbacks. I also look forward to hearing from each of your thoughts on how we can improve recruiting and retention of Afghan women in the ANSF and Afghan National Police. The issue is increasingly timely due to a number of second-order effects of low recruitment, such as the approaching presidential elections in April and the inability of Afghan women wishing to cast ballots to do so unless there are adequate women in uniform available to search them. The ANSF is not meeting its recruiting objectives, and the obstacles are varied and significant. So thank you all again for being here this afternoon, and I look forward to your testimony. Thank you, and thank you all. I think, as you can see, our focus and our concern is real, both as a result of all of your testimonies and understanding how important it is to the long-term stability of the country that these gains are not bargained away, and that women continue to have ways to meaningfully participate in their country. In a hearing, earlier hearing, our April hearing, there was testimony that said that the ANSF is primarily responsible for recruiting women. And Mr. Sopko, you said in your written testimony that 12,000 women police officers who can conduct body searches on women will be necessary at polling stations so that women are allowed to vote in the upcoming election. But unfortunately, there are currently only about 1,600 women police officers. And from your testimony, Ms. Barsa, this participation is a near-term problem and a long-term problem. The near-term is bulking up the police force so that women can fully participate. The long-term problem is that by participating, they have a stake in governance, and the security situation in the country reflects their input. So the question I have is, what are the levers we can use? If the ANSF is primarily responsible, we are quickly drawing down. How do we incentivize the ANSF to take seriously the need to have women participating to a necessary extent, one, so women can participate in the elections in the short term, and two, for the long-term security of the country. So I'll start with you, Ms. Barsa, and then Mr. Sopko, if you would answer.
Sure. It's not the easiest task, but there are a couple things I think you can do. I think one, and Congress has already taken this step, is to dedicate financial resources explicitly to recruitment and retention, and looking beyond just female-targeted recruitment campaigns, but really to the infrastructure and facility refurbishment, the reform of systems, policies, and processes that needs to happen to create a safe environment for women in the forces. That money needs strong safeguards so that it's not used for any other purpose, particularly if it's transferred to the Afghan ministries. And we also need to be creative in thinking about how we use this funding as potentially positive incentives so that the Afghan ministries, in theory, could get a plus up in their budget when they meet certain benchmarks related to recruitment and retention. Or if we look to money that's dedicated for higher education, secondary or tertiary education for girls, and looking at working out a system like our U.S. program of ROTC, such that women exchange scholarships to attend these higher institutions in exchange for service in either the police or Army, right? I think another piece of it is human resources. I mentioned the issue of the advisors. We need these advisors embedded within the ministry. They really force and drive action, as well as sitting close to the commanders of ISAF HQ, IJC, and NATO Training Command, as well as trainers. So the training capacity doesn't exist internal to the ANA, and it's quite weak within the ANP, within the Afghan National Police. And so they're looking externally to international trainers who can do trainings of trainers for the Afghans to build up that capacity. Diplomatic pressure is really important to bring it up in every key leader engagement, just as you all did in your Mother's Day Codel. Those gestures carry a lot of weight within the Afghan ministries. I think as we look to professionalizing the force, a reform and revision of the performance evaluation process, such that Afghan officers, particularly those in leadership positions, are evaluated not just on their tactical and operational performance, but on their demonstrated ability to uphold the values of the force. And for leaders, their unit's adherence to a code of conduct that includes zero tolerance for sexual abuse and harassment. And then finally, I think there's the support for ongoing efforts led by Afghan and international NGOs. There's a lot of really incredible work happening right now. Consortiums of Afghan women's NGOs that have set up a police mentoring project in the provinces and are working one-on-one with women police to build their capacity and help them advance complaints when they have them. There are police women's associations being formed, and the Afghan Women's Network, a local NGO, is training them in advocacy, bringing them for direct exchanges with chiefs of police. There's work with male commanders. There's community-based democratic policing projects, legal advisors embedded within the ministries who go through accelerated training led by NGOs. And that money is all currently coming through LOTFA, through the Law and Order Trust Fund, and it's unclear whether those funding levels will be sustained post-2014. So that's another clear avenue.
Mr. Sopko, if we have a little time.
I'm usually not into policy. I do process, as I've explained to you before. But I think all of the points raised by my colleague here at the table are accurate. I think we have to look at our own experience, and our own experience with how we integrated our military, how we have promoted women in the ranks, how we did it in the police forces. And there's no silver bullet. I think what my colleague has said is giving you a list of about 10 or 15 issues, and I think those are things you have to look at almost every one of them. But the one thing you do have, you have the purse strings. You have the money that's going to Afghanistan, and it's a lot of money. And I think you have to design a program that incentivizes doing what we, and that means you, and the taxpayer behind you, wants to see done. So there's no silver bullet. But I will say the one thing which will destroy any of your plans will be if security goes south on the Afghan country, and we don't have effective oversight.
Well, I want to thank you all for what's been a really very interesting and so important discussion. One of the things that I keep coming back into in my mind is, as I've, like every one of us here, have made these many trips to Afghanistan. In our last visit, one woman said to us, we were in Kabul at a meeting, and she said, "We don't expect more. We just want the space to fight for what we have." And so we understand that there's a limit to what we can do, and yet we want to be sure that, that we're doing as much as we can to allow Afghan women to continue the fight. We know it's a long-term effort. It's certainly been one, the United States effort's been long-term, but you've got to have the space to do it. So whether it's the security space, whether it's the political space, or whether it's the economic space, there are a lot of ways in which we have to think about it. And as we've been listening today, just a couple of things, Mr. Stopko, as you do your audit, it's an after-the-fact thing as opposed to prospective. But I think it's so important that you look at what succeeded and why. What about it made it successful? If you look at the amount of money that's actually been, clearly spent on issues related to women and children, it is so small in relationship to the total amount of dollars that have gone into Afghanistan. So and yet we see the successes. They may not cover huge numbers, but where they do have an impact, it's very apparent how real it is. So we've gotten a lot of money, we've got a lot of bang for our buck, at least in those specific dollars. Now, a lot of other dollars have gone in a more generic way, and I'm sure they've also helped promote women and girls. But I think to be very thoughtful about it. We've heard that there are differences in what's happened at the national level as opposed to the provincial level. I hope you'll look at that. It'd be interesting to know in those parts of the country that are more progressive, in which women's rights are continue to be recognized and promoted, and there's efforts to secure them. Are those the areas where the ANSF has had better ability to recruit women? I mean, is there a linkage there? I think it would be interesting to look at those prospectively. I also think it would be interesting to look at, a lot of money has come through the provincial reconstruction teams. Has that been an effective mechanism? Has that really worked? Or is the money that comes through the NGO community a better way to expend our dollars? So lots of things to look at prospectively, after the fact, because as we go forward, it will help guide how we continue to make investments so that we can be a partner and continue to allow women, promote the rights of women to continue to fight for what they think is so important for them as individuals and for their country.
Congressman, if I can just respond briefly. As I mentioned to you, I think yesterday, we did not get satisfactory response from DOD, aid, and State on what worked and what didn't work and why. So I met with a number of smaller NGOs who are working in the provinces, working in the community, and they complained. They said, "You're doing a great job, but you're tarring us with the same brush that these large corporations who may be screwing up out there have." And I heard them. I said, "Okay, what do you think works? The smaller charities that are working out there, the smaller NGOs. You tell me." So what they said, that sounds great. So we're going to be sending a letter to the smaller NGOs operating just to answer that type of question that you have proposed. Likewise, we're going to be doing a capping report on the PRTs. What worked, what didn't work, and why. So those are two projects that we are going to be doing in addition to our looking at how we're handling the funds for women and girls in Afghanistan.
And I don't know, Ms. Barsa, if you want to comment at all.
Sure. I couldn't agree with you more on the bang for your buck question, particularly. And when we're thinking about how to make our aid more effective, I hope that we think about women's integration as a key to that, right? Particularly when we're looking at things like building legitimacy and professionalism of a police force, right? When 6 out of 10 Afghans believe that female police are likely to resolve a crime more fairly than a man would, right? So I think,
sounds like the United States views of women in Congress.
There are now about 400 Afghan women's NGOs registered in country, and the work that they're doing is beyond. And the conversations that they're having with police commanders and ANA commanders at a provincial level are really what's driving change. They're having conversations about what the true nature of security threats are at a provincial level and whether or not an all-male force can address those threats. And inevitably, the answer is no from the male commanders themselves. And really, that's the way that you can force this change, both from the top down and the bottom up. So I think, I won't comment on the PRT issue. I have maybe some of my own personal perspectives on that, but I certainly think that assistance to the NGO community is a solid pathway forward in this.
Mr. Katzman, quickly.
Well, I mean, I think we've been talking a lot about incentives. What does Karzai care about, and what is his successor going to care about? Three things: arms, money, and Pakistan. Okay. To force change on the Afghans, you need to go at those core interests. If you want to get them to make reforms and keep the reforms that have been made on women going, on corruption, it could be anything. Education, corruption, women, you need to work those core interests that they have. They want protection against Pakistan. They want F-16 combat aircraft, which they're probably not going to get because they can't fly them. And they want a guarantee of U.S. money for the Afghan National Security Forces and the economy. So those are your levers that you're basically working with. The work that the NGOs are doing are great, and the problem is prospectively, when we're not there to basically ride them and oversee what the Afghans are doing, a lot of that is going to deteriorate. So you have to find ways to make it in their interest to continue that work after there are not 85,000 U.S. troops in Afghanistan, when there's only 8,000 U.S. troops in Afghanistan. That's the key to consider, I think.
Thank you.